During my 2 weeks in Jerusalem this summer, I had the opportunity to sit with and learn from dozens of remarkable leaders within Israeli society, scholars, organizers, journalists, teachers, public officials, peace activists, Jews and Arab Palestinians. So many remarkable people doing such remarkable work. Maybe, though, you won't be surprised to know that some of my most moving encounters, the encounters that most moved me, were with Israeli rabbis. This group, and particularly the women in this group, has been caring for the spirits and hearts of their people in unimaginable circumstances. Those mourning direct losses from October 7th, the massacre, or families of hostages. Those whose children or parents or siblings are soldiers in the IDF, some of whom have been killed during the war or who return home with terrible injuries to their bodies and to their souls. The dislocated families of the South and the North who have been living in motels and with relatives and friends for nearly a year. The faithful, the secular, the left wing, the right wing, often, as in our country, within the same household. And of course, these rabbis themselves are going through this trauma along with their congregants. They themselves fall into all the categories that I mentioned, which is why it was so remarkable to learn of how they do their work. One such person, Rabbi Tamar Elad Applebaum, spoke to our international group of 200 rabbis in Jerusalem, and the following story that she told us has taken root in my heart, as it did hers when it happened to her. Rabbi Tamar is an Israeli rabbi serving in Jerusalem in a community she herself founded, and her beautiful prayer for mothers, which she composed along with her friend and colleague Sheikh Ibtisam Mahamid, we just read before singing Sim Shalom for peace. The following is just one of many stories that she told our rabbinic seminar participants to try to convey what this year has been like for her, a rabbi, during a time of war and devastation, and to try and inspire us that day to think about hope with her. I'd like to quote her directly in hopes that it will help you to think about hope with me. These are her words. I remember a little boy in Kihilat Zion, my community, she said, that 1 week after that terrible Shabbat of October 7th, was on the 13th of October, after 5 Kabbalat Shabbat evening services that I had done with refugees from the South in different places, different kibbutzim, I remember I was on my way back to my community crying. I remember this was the first time in my life that I didn't have time to prepare for Shabbat by even putting on fresh clothes, and I was in my car cutting yellow ribbons, at every red light cutting yellow ribbons for my community to help them remember the hostages. And then I arrived to Zion, and I looked terrible, she said, and I felt terrible. I was with all these yellow ribbons, and I was crying, and a little boy in our community came to me and asked me an amazing question. He pulled and tugged at my dress, and he said, Rabbi Tamar, mutar achshav shetiyeh Shabbat ba'olam? Rabbi Tamar, are we allowed to have Shabbat in the world now? And she continued, I feel he asked me a very deep question. I feel that there are many people in Israel and in the Jewish world and in the world in general who are tugging on our skirts and asking us and all their leaders, Ha'im mutar shetiyeh tikva ba'olam? Is it permitted to have hope now? Because, she concluded, Shabbat is actually our Jewish notion of hope, of believing that there can be menucha, rest and shalom, peace for all of us. How many of us have echoed this little boy's question, especially in the past year, wondering if it is permissible, if it's possible to have hope now? Hope that the world can be different, hope that we can live together with more compassion and more peace, hope that the future can look brighter than the present. When our world turns upside down, whether in our private lives or in the lives that we share as a community, we all become children. We all become that little boy tugging at the skirt of the most nurturing presence that we know of, whether it is a religious leader or a dear friend or a parent or a teacher or just the memories of those people, or perhaps even God. And we ask, am I allowed to have hope now? How do I find my hope now? This is the most visceral and timely of questions as we witness the world metaphorically and literally on fire. We enter this new year facing wars that seem both inevitable and endless, alienation and demonization of one another that feels to us both as natural as breathing and as toxic as noxious chemicals, moral confusion and complexity that weighs so heavy it sometimes feels like we will never stand upright again. Communal and intergenerational strife that is driving parents from children and children from parents, the opposite of Malachi's famous prophecy. A sense of backsliding into an existence of Jewish precarity that we thought we had laid to rest many years ago, many generations ago. And all of this a backdrop to our own personal trials, our own losses, our own blows. How do we permit ourselves to hold on to hope? And is it worthwhile to try? Well, that depends on whether we can wrap our minds and our hearts around what hope actually is, what it means, what it looks like, what it feels like, and whether we can see ourselves as characters in a broad narrative of the Jewish people, a people who in many ways taught the world about hope. And whether we can successfully do teshuvah over the next 10 days and really throughout the rest of our lives is entirely dependent on whether we can hold on to, we can find our hope. Teshuvah, the concept that we can change the future by returning to the best of ourselves, that is only possible if we find hope. Scholars and clinicians in the social sciences have been developing more precise and helpful descriptions of hope in recent years. This is important for all of us because we are all living amidst an epidemic of loneliness and the rising rates of mental illness amongst us, and suicide, and despair over the myriad of crises that we face, big ones, from climate to pandemic to war. And as a society, it's important that we come to a better understanding of what hope actually is. And these studies are helping us with that. According to positive psychologist C.R. Rick Snyder, hope is not an emotion, but rather it is a thought process, a way of approaching struggle that can be developed over time. We can develop it. And it is realized through what Snyder identifies as this framework, a trilogy of goals, pathways, and agency. Sociologist Brene Brown explains Snyder's trilogy this way, quote, in very simple terms, hope happens when, number one, we have the ability to set goals. I know where I want to go. Two, we are able to figure out a way that we might achieve those goals, including the ability to stay flexible and develop alternative routes. I know some way to get there. I'm persistent, and I can tolerate disappointment and try again. And three, in the trilogy, that we believe in ourselves, we have agency. I believe I can do this. Brown emphasizes this important point as well. Hope is a function of struggle. We develop hope not during the easy or comfortable times, but through adversity and discomfort. Hope is forged when our goals and our pathways and our agency are tested and when change is possible, end quote. So hope is, according to the latest studies, a way of thinking that keeps us connected to the possibility of the future. And we learn to chart this mental, and I would add, spiritual path. Only when things are difficult. We only develop that when things are difficult. and when the simplest ways forward are blocked. This portrait of hope that the modern social sciences have described is a contemporary articulation of what Jewish philosophy and Jewish story has understood for a very long time. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, of recent blessed memory, the chief rabbi of England and really one of the preeminent intellectual giants of Jewish thought of our time, wrote beautifully about hope throughout his life, particularly reflecting on how hope is taught and learned through the Tanakh, through the Hebrew Bible, our most formative narratives. Rabbi Sacks taught that the Jewish people have a special role in perpetuating hope in the world based upon the following spiritual concept, and I quote him now: Judaism is a religion of details, but we miss the point if we do not sometimes step back and see the larger picture. To be a Jew is to be an agent of hope in a world serially threatened by despair. Every ritual, every mitzvah, every syllable of Jewish history, every element of Jewish law is a protest against escapism, resignation, or the blind acceptance of fate. Judaism is a sustained struggle, the greatest ever known, against the world that is, in the name of the world that could be, should be, and is not yet. There is no more challenging vocation. Throughout history, when human beings have sought hope, they have found it in the Jewish story. End quote. Hope is found in the Jewish story because, unlike ancient Greek culture, which was the most influential culture of the ancient Near Eastern world, and it viewed humans' futures as determined by the gods of nature and the fates themselves, ancient Hebrew culture viewed humanity as being endowed with free will and the capacity through this free will, through this freedom, to shape our own future. It was a revolutionary idea. It is our very ability to act and to know that our actions have an effect on the world, to really believe that generates our attitude within Judaism of hopefulness. Sacks explains further in his book, To Heal a Fractured World, quote, optimism and hope are not the same. Optimism is the belief that the world is changing for the better. Hope is the belief that together we can make the world better. Optimism is a passive virtue. Hope is an active one. It needs no courage to be an optimist, but it takes a great deal of courage to hope. The Hebrew Bible is not an optimistic book. It is, however, one of the greatest literatures of hope. The definition of hope, now so well known throughout the science of emotion and psychology, is even intimated in the ancient Hebrew word for hope, which is, of course, tikva. The word tikva occurs first in the book of Joshua, actually, when it is used to refer to a rope or a cord, a string. Later in the Tanakh, in the books of the prophets who speak to our people so much about the future that must be better than the present, tikva is used in that context to mean hope as we know it today. And examining these two uses of the word tikva, a cord or a rope on the one hand, and hope on the other, Rabbeinu Bachya ben Asher, 14th century Spanish biblical commentator, among others, recognizes a linguistic connection that helps to convey the spirit of the word in Jewish language and thought. Tikva comes from the word kav, which means a line or a cord, something that connects one point to another when there is distance between them. And so the idea of hope in the ancient, and really in the ancient Jewish imagination, comes into focus with this idea of kav. Hope in the Jewish mind is that cord. It is that rope that connects the present to the future. It is the sense, the conviction that there can be something better beyond the horizon, that change is possible, and that with that cord, with that line, with that connective tissue of tikva, we can be a part of building that future. That kav, that line, that rope, that is the image of hope generated in the Hebrew word that has been fundamental to our existence for thousands of years. This impulse toward connection, the sense that the future is something we can fight for, something that we can build, something that we can make a difference in terms of how it arrives and how we arrive to it. That is perhaps why Naftali Hertz Imber's 19th century poem called Tikvatenu, Our Hope, became so beloved by Jewish communities over decades that it ultimately became the official national anthem of the Jewish people in the state of Israel. It was not written to be such. Imber died in 1909, nearly 4 decades before Israel existed. But by using the word tikva and giving voice to the resilient spirit that he carried inside himself as a Jew and that he detected around him amongst the Jews of Eastern Europe, amongst those who were refugees from violence, Imber's poem, which is now known to almost every Jew in the world, tapped into something deep within his people, something that had been cultivated. People understood it intuitively as having been cultivated by the hymns of the Kabbalists, spot in the 17th century, by the poetry of longing from Yehuda Halevi in the 10th century in Spain, the prophecies of Jeremiah from the 6th century BCE from Babylonia, and the Exodus itself. Od lo avda tikvatenu, we have not yet lost our hope, is the mantra that has been on every Jew's lips since the crossing of the Red Sea, that led not to the promised land, remember. We did not cross the sea and end up in the promised land, but we ended up in the wilderness. We have had to become perpetual hopers because the bulk of our story has always taken place during a journey to somewhere better, not upon arriving. Most of the Torah takes place on the way. It is irrefutable, I believe, that we are on a journey and we are not standing upon a destined port right now. I believe that's true, and I hope and pray that that's true. I cannot remember a more suspenseful time, a time of more insecurity in almost every part of life. When will the next pandemic arrive, and what will it be? How far inland will the next big storm go, and what will it devastate? Will the entire Middle East be swallowed up by war and extremism, and with it, friends and family and the very story of Israel? Will we lose our liberal democracy here in America and succumb to the forces of alienation and fear? The list only grows at this moment. Huge questions, huge uncertainty and insecurity, wilderness, indeed. We have not arrived there, wherever there is. It is as if we are lost at sea. Legendary Israeli writer David Grossman has written about hope at times like this, composing the following evocative description of hope after the death of his son in the Lebanon War of 2006. And these are his words. How can I talk of hope when the reality I'm living in brings so much despair? Hope is a noun, but it contains a verb, he writes, that propels it into the future, always into the future, always forward motion. One could look at hope, he writes, as a sort of an anchor that is cast from a stifled, desperate existence toward a better and freer future, toward a reality that does not yet exist, which is made up mostly of wishes and imagination. Yes, perhaps we are lost at sea. We are perhaps in the widest, wildest wilderness many of us has ever known. We are, as our ancient ancestors, sitting on the shores of the waters of Babylon, weeping for all that has been lost in their defeat and their exile. We are weeping, too, for all that we thought we knew that now lays in pieces at our feet. But then, as now, an anchor must be cast because perhaps in desperation toward an unknown spot on the horizon, an anchor, this something very heavy to pick up and throw, something imprecise and clumsy, but in essence, a kav. We must have a kav, a thread that stitches us to the possibility of a different future. Hazorim bedima barina giktsoru. Those who sow in tears will reap in joy, we say, as a song of ascent that we sing regularly, and we will sing it on Yom Kippur. We must strive to ascend from this deepest, darkest place. And then Grossman adds the most important part of his image of hope. When the anchor is cast, he says, it holds on to the future, and then human beings, and sometimes entire societies, begin to pull themselves toward it. The kav, or the anchor, does not pull us toward the horizon, but rather we pull ourselves, having cast it forward, hand over hand, bringing our ship that is pitching and tossing in the waves of uncertainty and trauma and pain and loss toward whatever wishful, imaginative, better place the anchor has managed to dig in. This is our moment to cast the anchor. This is our moment to stitch the cord. This is our moment to honor the pathways, to celebrate the agency, to embrace the freedom that is at the very center of Jewishness. This is the moment to give thanks for the possibility of our own teshuvah, the very spiritual technology that makes hope possible. It is our invention, this idea of teshuvah, and it is a technology. It says you can change, and so therefore the world can change. This is the moment, and this is not the only moment. So is the next moment, and the next, and the next, and the next, and onward. In ancient Greek mythology, Sisyphus is punished for missteps by engaging in the futile task, as we all know, of pushing a boulder up a hill, only for it to be pushed down again by the gods. He is bound to engage in this meaningless act as a consequence for his moral failures. I know that sometimes we feel like Sisyphus, engaging in repetitive actions that seem to get us nowhere, that the destination, this rock on the top of a hill, we will never reach it. It is not reachable. That is the moral, the lesson of that story, of that myth. But on this Rosh Hashanah, I urge us all to remember that this is not the Jewish model, either for consequence or for destination. Rather, I offer us the following image, and I close with it. In our Torah, we are instructed to laha'alot ner tamid, to erect that which usually we translate as an eternal light. Every synagogue in the world has one because of this commandment that we read in the Torah. But actually, the meaning of this commandment is not a lamp that never goes out, which is the way that we usually talk about it. When we say eternal light, we say, oh, it's the light that never goes out. But of course it goes out. Of course it goes out. It went out in the temple in Jerusalem, and it goes out here at Torah Synagogue sometimes, and it goes out here. It goes out in our own hearts. The Torah is actually telling us not that we should have a perfect magical lamp that never dims, but rather to have amongst us a lamp that we built with our hands that we continually relight. That is what it tells us, actually. An eternal light is the light that we relight and relight and relight and relight. Laha'alot ner tamid means to light our lamps continually, regularly, constantly. And we are able to do this. We commit to do this because of our tikvah, the sacred place that hope holds within our community. When we make mistakes, or when we lose our bearings in the world, when we feel that the light inside of us is dimming, we do not assume that just up that hill that we can never really climb is the end of our journey. No, we know that there is only a continual commitment to teshuvah in our lives and the rekindling of a Ner Tamid in our communities and in our hearts. And the beautiful thing about a Ner Tamid is that when we rekindle it, this one or this one, it doesn't just light up our own lives. It lights up the world for others to see. It is an invitation for others to pick up that heavy anchor with us and to cast it as far out as possible, and then we pull with all our might. It is a reminder that actually we cannot perform that act of rekindling of hope alone. We need each other. Being a part of a community and of a Jewish people means that even when your light grows dim, when your arms grow tired, when your kav, when your rope is fraying, and when the sea isn't parting just yet, and the promised land feels 1,000,000 miles away, when you feel that you need to tug on the skirt of your Creator and ask, am I allowed to be hopeful now? You are not alone. None of us is alone. There is no message that I can give our community this Rosh Hashanah that can ease our troubled minds. The fires in the world are real. The fears we may feel are justified. We will do our best to make sense of this world of 5785 together. We will do so tomorrow night during Shabbat Shuvah. We will do so at our memorial service for October 7th, next Monday. We will do so during Yom Kippur when we speak again. And throughout our learning during this year, we will try to make sense of it, to get our bearings, to locate ourselves on the map of this wilderness so that we can find our pathway. Much of what we knew and much of what we believed about our lives and the world, I know, it's shattered. And it's important to name that. But looking at the pieces and the shards all around us, I promise you that each one of us is a part of a story that has at its very heart the assurance that hope is sacred, hope is powerful, hope is urgent, and most importantly, hope is possible, hope is permissible. Mutar lanu shetia tikva. It is permissible, it is possible, it is imperative that we have hope now. Let us carry that promise of our 5,000-year-old tradition into these days of awe, and let it strengthen us as we begin our deep work of teshuvah and relighting our Ner Tamid together. Shana Tova.